and welcome to Something's Off with Andrew Heaton. I'm your host, Andrew Heaton, at least for now. We've been in a trade war with China for about a year. You may not have noticed, but all the same, it's probably affected you. The trade war costs American consumers, like you and me, over $1 billion every month. For example, President Trump put a $20 tariff on washing machines. The idea behind it being that by making Chinese washing machines 20% more expensive, American-made washing machines just became 20% more competitive. Except, of course, that we also put a tariff on aluminum and steel, which means American manufacturers who import steel, which is most of them, are suddenly paying for that as well. And the result from all of this? Fewer and more expensive washing machines all around. Now, for me, this isn't a huge deal. I'm a raving success story. I own 3 different washing machines just because I can, and in particular because I don't like to mix socks with capes. But for a poor family, paying an extra $100 on a washing machine is money that doesn't go to something else. It's weird that we're even having this debate because Adam Smith figured that out, that free trade is the best system 2.5 centuries ago. And today, in the 21st century, pretty much all economists, even the irritating ones, agree that tariffs are a bad idea and that free trade between nations is good. Here's why. Let's say Scotland is great at growing whiskey, making whiskey, but it's bad at growing wine. Because Scotland is basically a large green sponge with some alcoholics on top. Not great wine growing environment. Hypothetically, let's say some hatless, mouth-breathing mercantilist got into power in Scotland and wanted to protect the struggling, anemic Scottish wine industry from the sneaky French. After they put tariffs on that imported French wine, the French wine's more expensive. So the Scottish wine is more competitive, at least in price, if not in taste. Now, some of the sopping wet peat bogs the Scots would normally squeeze whiskey from are drained and turned into sad vineyards, which dribble out trace amounts of fermented Scottish grape juice. Meanwhile, the French, who are pissed off about all of this, enact their own whiskey tax in retribution. That makes French brandy more competitive, so the French start digging up their vineyards and turning them into whiskey distilleries, but they're not very good because their brandy's too sweet, and also the French only work twice a month. So the end result of this is the Scots are unproductively growing a little wine and a good amount of whiskey, and the French are making a little brandy and a good amount of wine, instead of the Scots making a ton of whiskey and the French making a ton of wine. Combining those two nations, there's less whiskey and less wine than if both countries figured out what they were good at, and they could do that by having a free and open market. And even then, that booze, which does exist, is more expensive because tariffs are a tax. If you happen to stumble upon some of these fair-weather Republican politicians who suddenly went from being ardent free traders to re-microwaved mercantilists, be sure to remind them that if they support a trade war, they are pro-tax and anti-freedom. Tariffs are a tax to punish you for having the gall to purchase something made by a foreigner. I think my scotch and wine example is pretty good, but let's go past the economics to something a little bit deeper here. I am a free citizen of a free country, and that means I have the right to hire, screw, and buy stuff from whoever I want to. And the government should shut the hell up about it and focus on protecting me from communists and bears. If I want to buy a Chinese washing machine because it's cheaper, bully for me. If the Chinese government wants to subsidize their washing machine industry to make them cheaper still, thanks, China. Thanks for screwing over your own taxpayers so that we can buy artificially cheap washing machines. I'll buy a 4th one for my ascots. Now, to be as even-handed about this as I can, I think the most generous interpretation of the trade war, is that Donald Trump is using tariffs as a temporary negotiating tactic to try and have a bargaining tool to restructure some of the unfair Chinese trade practices with. For example, Chinese companies don't care about our intellectual property laws or our copyrights, and so they bootleg and sell a fair amount of IP. It could be that once we've struck a better deal, we'll drop the tariffs kiss and make up, and go back to buying cheap washing machines and scotch and wine. I don't think so. I say that because literally the only policy prescription which Trump has consistently maintained over the last 10, 20 years is that tariffs are good. Going back to the 80s, he's been in favor of tariffs, presumably because he never read Adam Smith, and he's a teetotaler, so he cannot benefit from my awesome scotch and wine analogy noted supra. On Sunday, President Trump said he's planning to add more tariffs on Chinese goods. Specifically, he's threatening to raise tariffs on $200 billion in goods with a possible additional tariff on another $325 billion in goods. We're going to dive a little deeper into this infuriating economic illiteracy in a moment. But first, we've got to make money to buy that scotch and wine, don't we? And that means a word from our sponsor. Something's Off with Andrew Heaton is brought to you by beef smoothies. And not just any beef smoothies, the very best beef smoothies there are from Liquid Meats Incorporated. Liquid Meats has been pulping and pureeing beef for nearly 100 years. Don't believe me? Listen to this vintage Something's Off podcast clip from 1936.
Summer Olympics. America has performed well so far, but now all eyes are on the 100-meter dash. There's our lads near the starting line preparing to run. Ralph Metcalf, Frank Wyckoff, and the very smiley Jesse Owens. Nearby, you can see Tinus Olsendorp from the Netherlands next to Lennart Stanberg of Sweden, and Germany's very own Aryan Superman, Eric Borkmeyer. And they're off. Eric Borkmeyer's in the lead, followed by Lennart Stanberg and Ralph Metcalf. But wait, what's this? Jesse Owens is surging forward. He's passing Stanberg, passing Metcalf, and yes, he's ahead of Germany's Eric Borkmeyer. It looks like not only will America win, but a black American at that. Wait, hold on. Over in the Nazi VIP section, the Fuhrer is clearly agitated by this development. He's shouting something and gesticulating wildly. Now he's pulling out a pistol and he's waving it at the field. My God, Adolf Hitler just shot Eric Borkmeyer, and now he's... Yes? Hitler's jumping out of the Führer box and onto the track. No, I can't speak German, and I can't read lips, but it seems like he's saying, I will win this 100-meter dash with good quality German methamphetamines. And indeed, he's popping a handful of Pervitin, the crystal meth capsule, which is legal at this time. Oh my, Hitler's now goose-stepping at an incredible pace. He's just goose-stepped past Tinus Olsendorp, and now Stanberg and Metcalf, even Wyckoff. He's just past Jesse Owens. Oh, what a slap in the face to America, democracy, and race relations everywhere. Wait, hold on a minute. It appears that Jesse Owens is... he's pulling out some kind of thermos. And now he's drinking it. It's a beef smoothie from Liquid Meats Unlimited. He's doubled his speed. The protein is pushing him forward ever faster. Now he's past Adolf Hitler, whose frantic meth-filled goose steps cannot possibly keep up. And he's won! He's won! Jesse Owens just won the 100-meter dash! USA! USA! Hold on. Now Jesse Owens is doing a victory lap around the Olympia Stadium. And my God, he's picked up the pistol used to murder Eric Borkmeyer. And he's charging into the stands. Great Caesar's ghost! He just shot Archduke Franz Ferdinand! Oh, this is a bad news indeed. An American Olympic athlete just murdered the heir apparent of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It will almost certainly escalate into a conflict between the great powers. Now back to John Philip Sousa.
The chronological events in that particular historical clip are a little confusing, to be honest with you. But you know what's clear? That Jesse Owens won the 1936 Olympics because of the clean, high-energy potency of an all-American beef smoothie. Beef smoothies from Liquid Meats Unlimited. It's raining meat. Before I bring on my guest, we're going to do another edition of Travels with Heaton, or perhaps Heaton's Travelogue. I don't remember what I called it last week, but it's where you get to learn about another country through my experiences going there. Today, we're going to talk about Serbia. I had a great time in Serbia. The whole time I was there, I felt like if I passed out and fell over on the sidewalk for some reason, people would rush to help me. I thought they were all really friendly and nice. The first day I was in Belgrade, which is the capital of Serbia, and here's the educational part. It's been, I think, burned down and rebuilt like 400 times over the last 1,000 years. Like if you're going to take over Europe, go ahead and swing through Belgrade and burn it to the ground, because that seems to be the normal course of events for that city. Although I wouldn't do it because I liked it quite a lot. So I went there. First stop, I went to a church dedicated to soldiers. All of the chandeliers are made out of bullets at this particular church, which was unique. And one of the priests spoke English, and he kind of showed me around. And at one point, we get to an icon of Christ, and he said, "This is an icon that the Patriarch of Moscow gave us when the Americans were bombing us." And I went, "Hey, sorry about that." And he got so apologetic. He went, No. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. That's not your fault. It's not my fault. That was the fault of our governments. We want to be friends with you. And I apologize for making you feel uncomfortable here. You're our guest. In fact, we're having a wedding tomorrow. Please come. It's at noon. We'd love to have you. And I felt very, very welcome after that. I didn't go to the wedding, that particular wedding. I showed up late. I don't remember why I showed up late. It could be that I got distracted. This was also in my early 20s. There's a decent chance I was hungover. I don't know. But I showed up. I showed up a little bit late. I went to the wrong wedding and ended up making friends with a bunch of gypsies. Because in Serbia and in Bulgaria and a few of these other places, gypsies will hang out outside of the church, and when the wedding couple comes out, they'll play music until you pay them to stop. So this is the Eastern European equivalent of aggressive mariachi bands that assault your wedding with upbeat music until you pay them to leave. In my case, I thought they were kind of fun, and they kind of came around me, and one of the kids who was, I don't know, like probably 14 or something, asked me for beer money, and I was so charmed that he was being direct and honest with me that I gave him the equivalent of $6, and thereafter had my own personal gypsy band for a few minutes, which was awesome. If I ever become, incredibly wealthy, I think I'll just hire bands to follow me around and illustrate my mood through song. In the case of these band members, they were trying to play Yankee Doodle Dandy, but about halfway through, you could tell that they had kind of forgotten how to resolve it. They were all kind of looking at each other out of the corner of their eyes, and they lurched into the theme song from Pink Panther. So my personal fanfare while I was in Serbia was Yankee Doodle Panther, which I think is actually quite fitting. So had fun there. I went out to another town in Serbia, further away from Belgrade. I now forget the name of this place, but it was in the mountains, or right on the cusp of the mountains, and a smaller area. I show up to my hostel. I walk in with a couple of international travelers, and we're all introducing ourselves to the guy that runs the hostel, and he's asking us where we're from. And one guy says, "Oh, I'm from Australia," and a lady's like, "I'm from France," and I go, "I'm from Oklahoma," and the guy pauses and then looks at me and goes, "No, you are from the past. You are from 1940." Which I thought was fairly good observation on his part. And so I go, "Hey, what do people do for fun in this town? Like, where do I go?" And he goes, "Come with me and tell no one." We got in his car, we drove to the edge of the town, and we sat there and looked at a dumpster, staring at this dumpster. But after a couple of minutes, some bears wandered out of the mountains and started pawing and rummaging through this dumpster. And then immediately thereafter, a bunch of Serbian teenagers showed up and started running by and trying to whack one of the bear cubs with their hand, or like tag it. I'm not saying it was necessarily violent, although there were a couple of slaps. And that appears to be, from what I can tell, the Serbian youth version of cow tipping, which we hypothetically do in Oklahoma. Although, to be honest with you, I think cow tipping is probably a myth. I don't think it actually exists. And even if it does, cows don't want to eat your head. Whereas mama bears definitely want to eat your head. That mama bear wanted to kill a bunch of people, but they'd run over, poke a bear cub, and run away. Apparently this is illegal, which is why I was supposed to tell no one, and I'm only revealing it to you now because I feel enough time has transpassed that I'm not going to get anybody in trouble. So that's my trip to Serbia. Hope you enjoyed that. We'll end that and then go on to the guest. My guest today is Jeremy Kareken. He is a writer and an actor, specifically a playwright and an actor. Jeremy, thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, great to be here.
Yeah.
I love your trip to Serbia. I've got to say
Thank you.
one rule that has done me pretty well in life is when someone says in a foreign country, "Come with me and tell no one," I don't. But you're not me. That's okay.
Yeah, I feel like most of my good stories have a moment where at some point I'm in a car with a foreigner and go, I think this might be where I die. Like I can think of at least 3 instances where there was a moment where I went, I think this person might kill me. In his case,
I do have one story
Yeah?
when I went to like that where I had to visit the Libertarian Party of Cuba.
oh my
I
God,
thought I was
really?
going to die.
Yeah, I would
there you
think
go.
so. The Libertarian Party of Cuba, I assume that's illegal.
Well, it is. It's a tremendous. It has all of the organizational power of the international libertarian movement behind it.
Oh yeah, that's the Mount
Which-
Pelerin Society's bankrolling that, just like they did with President Rand Paul.
It's the Illuminati. It's as well. No, it's a guy in an apartment, and yes, it is illegal. And apparently, 2 white guys showing up in this barrio, pointing at books by Friedrich Hayek in Spanish, going, "Oh, isn't this lovely?" Tends to bring around the police. They got thrown in jail, and I would make a terrible international spy. I gotta say, we stuck out like a sore thumb.
You know
But
what?
we delivered some toys and some
Ah.
Band-Aids, and
Nice.
hopefully made some children feel a little freer.
I hope that guy is not rotting in political prison right now. That said, though, I'm kind of glad he got arrested. I'll tell you why. If the Cuban government had been like, "Oh man, this is so ridiculously unlikely, and there's only one guy, we're not even going to bother," I feel like that would be
We're
kind
dangerous.
of a snub. Yeah, but if they lock him up, I'm like, all right, cool. The libertarians are at least a little bit dangerous in Cuba.
Exactly. He got out a few weeks later. I think he was okay. I gather that Cuban prisons aren't the worst. If you're aren't the worst in the world. They're bad, but considering where they stuck him as his apartment, I gather it wasn't too much worse.
Okay. Yeah. That makes me feel good because at some point I would like to go to Cuba. I want to do it while I'm not allowed to because I resent the American government telling me where I can and cannot go. So I'll probably do it at some point. But I also tend to be kind of mouthy. And so I'm a tad concerned that I'll get arrested for something.
They love that.
Yeah,
no,
they
actually,
love
everyone in Cuba is mouthy too. That place is just, they are all, no one likes the government. No one likes the situation there. Everybody seems, at least moved to rolling their eyes.
Oh, that's great.
So
yeah,
revolution.
I've not been to Cuba. The people sound pretty chill though. A few years ago, when I was still in New York, I got to briefly interview Conan O'Brien right after he had done his special in Cuba, and then I was in an event where I watched it, and Anderson Cooper got the bigger interview. But he got to interview Conan, and we watched this clip of him and Cuba, and then he talked about it afterwards. And he mentioned at one point that they were recording the sunset in Havana, and a policeman came up and was like, "Hey, do you have a permit to record this sunset?" And he went, "We don't. It's just so pretty." And the guy looked at it and he went, "Yeah, okay." And I was like, "Oh, that's a great police officer right there, where you can basically talk him into it. Just sort of like, listen, the sunset is really pretty. I mean, I think you have to acknowledge that." And he's like, "Good point. Go ahead, man." So I don't know. I'd like to hang out there.
I like how the Castro government somehow has the rights to the sun. How I didn't give it to them. I don't know who did. But.
Yeah, those IP laws, they are rigorous in Cuba. Yeah, the sunset is owned by the government.
El Sol, TM Castro.
So let's talk about tariffs for a minute.
Yes.
What is happening? What is the president threatening us with, he's threatening us and he's threatening China because it's going to fall on both of us. So what's going on?
He says he's threatening China, but he's threatening us.
Yeah, because we're going to pay for it.
We're going to end up paying for it. He is these latest trade deals, the trade negotiations with China have fallen through the cracks. They didn't, the Chinese are upset. They didn't get what they wanted. Trump didn't get what he wanted, and negotiators canceled. Chinese diplomats are coming to the United States, and Trump has threatened to more than double the tariffs from 10% to 25%.
So his strategy is it hasn't been working, so let's go ahead and double it.
Do it harder.
Do it
That's
harder. Do it harder.
basically
That could be, maybe that could be Trump's re-election campaign in 2020. It was Make America Great Again. This year, Trump : do it harder.
Do it harder. Or someone, when I was mentioning to someone else on the social medias that he'd lost $1 billion and was taking it off on all his taxes, they said, whatever, it's legal. And I said, no, that's a better slogan. That's more like Trump. Whatever, it's legal.
Whatever, it's technically legal is a great bumper sticker. That would that would melt me a tad bit towards the Trump campaign just for the humor and directness of it.
Yeah, I got to say it may even be a few too many syllables, but I think they might go with it. Who knows? But so they want to more than double these tariffs on, consumer goods and of course component materials like you talked about, aluminum, steel, things like that.
Yeah, I think the term is intermediate materials or intermediary materials, which people, if you're unfamiliar with trade and tariffs, intermediate materials are where, like, maybe I am an American car manufacturer and I assemble the car in the United States. The intermediate materials are maybe the mufflers from China. So it's
anything between raw materials and the actual finished product. So if you're mining bauxite, that's not an intermediary material. That would be a
You picked a $200 term right there with bauxite. I guess that's a good a good periodical element. Okay, yeah. So
right. You refine it into aluminum, or aluminium for our cousins.
We have some British listeners. Shout out to Portishead, and I think we got a couple in Edinburgh as well. So they finally know what we're talking about.
Oh, you're pinging them well with the whiskey stuff. Mm-hmm, good job. Yeah. There is Scottish wine, by the way. I have tried it. It goes great with haggis. I've got it.
Haggis goes great with everything. Maybe it's okay. I'm actually surprised that you could grow grapes that far north. Like England has some. I used to work in a town called, what was it, Dorcas or Dorkney or something? Dork was built right into the town's name in England, and it's near Denbies, which is the largest vineyard in England. And I did not think you could get much. But those enterprising Scots, they love. Have you ever had Buckfast?
No, what's that?
I'm going to clarify. I should not say that the Scots love Buckfast. The sorts of Scots who enjoy beating the hell out of each other in a parking lot love Buckfast. Buckfast is a wine with caffeine in it that you get from like Tesco's or Denbies, and it is like
that's like chocolate and peanut butter. That's brilliant.
It is in a less stabby country, in a country that enjoys stabbing and fighting with pint glasses. It's less like if I'm at Tesco's in Scotland and it's like 9 p.m. and some guy's like, "Hey, I'll take a bottle of Buckfast." I'm like, I'm walking in the opposite direction of that dude because he's looking for something up later this evening. No one's drinking caffeinated. You got your wine and my caffeine. Yeah. And it's made by monks in England. Like, I'm not entirely, like, there's this weird relationship with them. Like, no one's told the monks apparently. Yeah. It's some, which I thought the English got rid of all those guys, but apparently there's some holdout group in England that makes caffeinated wine, and I guess no one wants to hurt their feelings and tell them that it's only used as a fuel for bar fights. So they're doing
that. There's nothing Christian that could come of this. That's just all I'm thinking.
You can have wine, you can have coffee, you can't combine them. That's in Leviticus.
Don't put them together. Well, Red Bull and vodka, that's a beautiful thing too, I guess. But those were not pleasant nights either.
I was about to say that sounds like a beautiful thing in my 20s. That sounds like a real pain now that I'm 35. That does not sound like something I want to do.
That's just the next morning has got to hurt.
Yeah. Well, think about that. If you get stabbed by a wine bottle in a Scottish parking lot, it's even worse for a hangover. We got sidetracked.
What were we talking about? Stabbed by anything. Okay, so back to tariffs. Back to being stabbed. We're being shanked. By this because anything, we don't make things like wine or whiskey so much as anymore. These are like artisanal little things that maybe have some local value, but most of the important things in the world these days are made from components that are made from intermediate materials, raw materials. They're assembled in different places. So all this does is a tax on the world economy that consumers end up paying for. Employees pay for it because economic activity goes down. Employers pay for it because they can't afford, the economies of scale like they used to. And, taxpayers will end up paying for it too, because all of that is lost income. Mm-hmm. So it's it's the kind of war that nobody wins. Trade war.
Yeah.
Everybody loses. It's a terrible idea. And he's always willing to fire the first shot, despite, it's like strapping on a suicide vest, but, and then and threatening to blow yourself up while the guy's 500 miles away. What's the point? All we're doing is hurting ourselves.
Yeah, and there are some ominous overtones to this too. I mean, I think there are probably people listening that are rolling their eyes about a washing machine having an increase in price. Although again, I will point out that that's more of an issue if you're poor. You feel $100 if you're at
we in the middle class who have to mix our cakes and our ascots, we're in real trouble.
Right. Yeah. But like one of the other things worth pointing out is there's been a pretty good body of evidence the last 100 years or so that what we used to call a democratic peace, the idea that democracy brings peace, actually has kind of been superseded by a capitalist peace. And the idea is that if we've got a bunch of Coca-Cola products we're selling in China, and China's selling a bunch of cheap cell phones in America, we're a lot less likely to want to bomb each other because the people that might have a outsized voice in government affairs, they don't want to lose all that profit margin. So they're like, can you guys figure out a way to work this out that doesn't involve bombs? Which I am 100% in favor of. I think that's a great idea. And tariffs, unfortunately, kind of chip away with that. We've had some really bad historical precedents where we were ramping up tariffs in the run up to World War I. If you look at Eastern Europe, which is where the trouble developed, where Archduke Franz Ferdinand was shot in real history.
Right.
Over in Eastern Europe, they had all these kind of security-oriented trade blocks going on. Western Europe, not so much. But again, the trouble percolated in Eastern Europe, and then
but the Western nations were allied with them.
Yes,
the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There, once a couple $1,000,000, someone gets hurt, then someone gets shot, and then everybody sees that conquest is what makes money if trade doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
People turn to conquest when trade doesn't work.
Yeah.
That is what Germany did, and we didn't in World War I, as in World War II, and in no small part did we not. We very much contributed to it with our own Smoot-Hawley tariffs in the late 1920s, which also helped worsen the Depression.
I was about to say, the Smoot-Hawley tariffs did a great job of prolonging the Great Depression. If you were a fan of the Great Depression, Smoot-Hawley was a great way to just egg that on for another few years.
And we're even more internationally connected now. This global economy could come to a standstill if we suddenly get into nationalism, if we suddenly get into so-called fair trade, which we all know is a euphemism for protection.
Maybe
so
when I get the honest question is I don't know about this. When I see coffee that is quote unquote fair trade, it's my understanding that is just a coffee grower that has agreed to pay their employees more, which I'm fine with.
That's fine. That is actual fair trade. That's
it's
grower getting a decent price.
Yeah.
For what they're selling.
But I guess you're talking more about the kind of Trump sycophants in Congress who are like, well, I'm in favor of free trade, but I want it to be fair trade or whatever. And then that just means, yes, that we're going to end up having more taxes and more tariffs to try and navigate that free trade towards a more optimal statist viewpoint.
It's how what people say is at least as important, but I would say how people say something is at least as important as I will say when people say something is more important, because whenever somebody says, I'm in favor of free trade, and it's the first thing out of their mouth, I think, oh God, what comes next?
Yeah, comma,
and then you hear, but I'm all in favor of free speech, but I'm not a racist, but it's coming. It's like, don't tell me you're in favor of free trade when then you're not going to be in favor of free trade. 25% protection tariffs, which are the maximum he's allowed to go to. If he had control of both houses of Congress, he could go much more than that. But this is all that the executive branch is allowed to at this moment.
And I think that's what the 1962 Trade Act, I don't think anybody really used, but that was on the books. I think that's what that allows
Lyndon
the
Johnson,
president.
I think, was the first one to use it because of those chicken wars with Mexico, I think. But
yes, the glorious chicken wars. A lot of good patriotic songs came out of that.
I'm a veteran from the chicken wars. So, So why he's offering to fire the first shot in a war where he knows he has limited ammunition, and it's a war that everybody loses, is beyond me, other than he just likes to win. That's his psychology, as far as I can tell.
I think he definitely wants to win. He, as I mentioned earlier, I do think he has this weird fixation on tariffs and mercantilism, because you look back on him, like, he was a Democrat, up until what, 10 years ago, 15 years? I mean, not even 10 years ago. I mean, he was a Democrat through Romney, I think. He does not appear to have an ideological core that's tethering him to any particular set of principles or government policies, with the exception of tariffs, which he's been talking about since the 80s. And I think that it is if you don't know economics, and economics is oftentimes very counterintuitive, I think the emotionally satisfying thing to say is, well, it's good to be independent and it's good to be self-sufficient. And so we want to have a system that fosters self-sufficiency. That sounds good. That feels right, because that's kind of what we do in our own. Well, it's not what we do in our own household, because we buy other things. But there's something.
It plays into the American myth of the rugged individual.
Yeah, it has something to it. But when you actually get into the economics of it, it's like, no, that none of that makes sense. It's better to be in this network. It's better to pay people that are doing something cheaply and well than trying to do it yourself. We wouldn't want to extend this backwards, and this is kind of, I think, a decent argument for when you're talking to mercantilists or protectionists here in the United States, is, do you think it would be a good idea to do that in your own state? Would it be a good idea for Kansas to put taxes on any wheat imported from other states? Would it be a good idea for California to put taxes and tariffs on cars coming from Michigan? I don't think so.
I'm afraid to make that argument because the answer in New York State was yes. We put severe tariffs on California wine.
Wait, really?
In New York State, to protect New York State's fledgling wine industry, which is still fledgling. There's some lovely wines that come from upstate, but they're Rieslings. They're a particular varietal that does well in this climate, in the Seneca Lake region. And there's some in Long Island, which are fine. They're okay, but it's California.
Yeah.
They do it better. The law of comparative advantage says they produce it in so much greater greater volumes that they can sell us good, cheap wine better than ours at a lower price. Why not?
100%.
If you want to have the local tipple, good. Yes, do. It's going to cost a little more, but that's it. The prices of New York State wine did not go down because of this. I think it was Cuomo that put in these tariffs.
Oh, so you're not talking about like 1820 or something. This is a recent thing. They can do that legally. I thought we had. I would think that the Commerce Clause in the Constitution, which normally I feel like is used as a bludgeon to do whatever you want, but I would feel like the Commerce Clause under this circumstance would be an apt one to go, look, you can't do tariffs on other states. We're part of a free trade network.
You would think so. However, that is, we have the ability to levy state sales tax. And state sales taxes on wine not produced in New York State are higher. Now, what reversed that to some degree was a Supreme Court case where Scalia, being from Queens and a lover of wine and someone who believes in free trade, said that they're not allowed. He knocked it down significantly, particularly over internet wine shipments. States were clamping down on that as well. So that was a blow to those particular taxes. But no, I think if you start talking about that to Kansas or New York or California, they're going to go, "Hey, that's a good idea."
Yeah, you're right. I need to quit using bad arguments when talking to economically dubious people. Well, no, because economically disadvantaged. I'm trying to say economically illiterate. I'm trying to figure out a nice way to say that.
Enumerate.
Economically other thinkers. Probably best not to give them ammunition to enact terrible ideas. So let me run a couple of counter arguments by you. Sure. I mentioned earlier, I think the most generous argument you can give the Trump administration on trade is that this is a temporary measure in order to try and extort a better deal with China regarding IP law and things like that. But it is temporary in nature. Do you think there's anything to that?
I don't. He's always been in favor of tariffs. He's always said things like, we can I can win a trade war. I like a good trade war.
Yeah.
Trade
wars are good and easy to win is, I believe, a direct quote from our presidential Twitter feed.
And yeah, exactly. And I don't know a single economist that agrees with either. But there you go.
Yeah.
And then also, if his biggest sycophants are saying, no, this is all just a cunning plan that he'll back off. And it's like, that's your defense, that he's going to fold, that this is an empty threat. That's a terrible defense.
Yeah.
So it's like bluffing on a queen 3 in whatever that, and it's the worst possible hand. Like, why are you bluffing with this then? So
yeah, I think you're probably right. I think that were Trump able to maintain control of economic policy indefinitely, he would probably keep us in that protectionist bracket. What about one of the other arguments I hear is okay, this makes washing machines cost more, but it creates American jobs. There are more, we've got an upswing in the manufacturing sector and that kind of thing. What's your response to that?
That's an absolutely ridiculous argument for the simple reason that when American manufacturers have to pay more for components and refined material on the international market, and it is a global market in the futures world. That's how they buy equipment, and that's how they buy the actual materials. If they have to pay more for that they have less that they can pay for labor. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to create jobs, you're going to lose them.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I'll add to that as well that generally when you look at jobs reports, it'll say like you have to look at some of the weasel words that are occasionally used. And by the way, this goes back 20 years. This is not specifically the Trump administration, but when you're looking at jobs reports, it'll say we've created, let's say, 200,000 jobs this year. And it's like, okay, how many jobs were lost? And it's like, 198,000 jobs or something like that, where it's like, well, right, okay, like in a market economy, you're going to have a lot of new jobs created. You're going to have a lot of other jobs that become outmoded or non-competitive and go away. So you need to look at the net gain. And then beyond that, I think when I look at the manufacturing, you can also look and see both. Yeah, there's probably some outfit that's going to gain. If you look at it in an isolated capacity, Whirlpool.
Of course, it's going to be winners and losers.
Yeah, exactly.
It's going to be more losers than winners.
Yeah, you can cherry pick the data and go, oh, well, this one factory that's in Wisconsin did, like, they added 40 jobs. And it's like, right, but if we look at this in total, the factory over in Michigan that was like everybody relying on intermediate parts, they had to cut 60 jobs. So overall, it's not going to be a good thing. It's going to go ahead and balance itself out to the negative.
And if you look at the actual aggregate opinion of the business community, which is very well, what was their opinion of when this happened? The stock market flopped yesterday when he announced.
Yeah,
it flopped because they thought when the trade talks broke down, and they flopped when he did what they expected he was going to do, was go back to his old tired idea of more tariffs.
Yep. It doesn't seem to be beneficial short term, medium term, or long term. Okay, we're going to wrap up. Jeremy, I feel invigorated from your excellent analysis of tariffs. One of my favorite things to hate on. I don't know what this says about me that I get more. There are things in the world far worse than tariffs, but tariffs irritate me so much because we've all. A long time ago, all the economists were like, yeah, they're dumb. And we're still having this argument, and it blows me away. So
it's the economics equivalent of the Flat Earth Society. It doesn't, it's counterfactual.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I feel bolstered in doing that. Before I let you go, you are a playwright. Is your play still on Broadway?
No, it is not. We had a limited run in January of Lifespan of a Fact, but it will probably be coming to your town if you are listening to this podcast.
Portishead, go for it.
Well, you never know.
Yeah.
It will be. We have about a dozen regional theaters producing it this year. We have about another dozen the following year. We're going to be in Vienna, Singapore.
Oh, cool.
All over the country. I don't know how I'm going to look at these translations, but David and I are going to do it and see what we can do, and I hope they'll make sense. But we had a great run on Broadway in at the end of 2018, the beginning of 2019.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, didn't you have Daniel Radcliffe in your play, like the guy that played Harry Potter?
We certainly did. Daniel was terrific. He was hysterical in the role. We had Bobby Cannavale and we had Cherry Jones. So an all-star cast, and we had smashing reviews. Sadly, we were shut out of the Tonys, but it's not about awards the way I do things. So
nice. Well, I like your. I'm sorry you didn't get a Tony, but I'm glad that you are moving on to Singapore, Vienna, hopefully Dallas, and a few.
Dallas. I think Dallas. There's at least one theater company in Dallas that wants to do it.
Nice.
And one in Houston. So yeah, it's coming.
Excellent.
You'll see it.
I'll check it out. And Jeremy, I had a great time talking to you. Please come back on the program.
Hey, would love to. Thanks so much. See you later, Heaton.
Okay.
All right.
Little bit of listener feedback before we wrap up today. On iTunes, Roy Jojo says, Andrew Heaton is great. This review is off to an excellent start. Thank you very much, Roy Jojo. Back to the review. I've been following his work since a bit before the podcast came up, and he is the reason I listen to podcasts today. Did you hear that, audience? I am the reason that Roy Jojo is listening to podcasts. I am responsible for the entire medium in this person's life. Back to the review. Something's Off is the best podcast I've found, and am so happy it releases episodes daily. It's high-quality content, high-quality entertainment, and a smooth audio experience overall. Keep up the amazing work, Mr. Heaton. You are awesome. Thank you. I'm going to print that off and put it on one of my 3 or 4 washing machines. That was so good for my self-esteem. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Jojo. Or Roy Jojo. I'm sorry, I've already forgotten. I think Jojo was part of it. Thank you. You can watch this whole show on YouTube. If you look for Something's Off with Andrew Heaton, you can see my handsome bearded face, an assortment of suits and pocket squares, and the dead bison head we screwed to the wall. Something's Off with Andrew Heaton now comes in 8 distinct flavors, including Rocky Road, which, if you think about it, isn't so much a flavor as it is a consistency variance. Oh my God, Jennings, that's really true. But hey, what better place to come for consistency variance than here? So go to YouTube and start watching full episodes. I look like Andrew Heaton if he were real. Remember, you can always tweet me at Mighty Heaton or Facebook me at facebook.com/Mighty Heaton, or even email me by subscribing to my newsletter at mightyheaton.com and replying when I send it out or when you get your confirmation letter. Finally, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Didn't we have fun today here at this political orphanage? Don't you want to expand a little bit, make more friends? Well, in that case, rate, review, subscribe, all that stuff. That helps other people discover this here political orphanage. Thank you, and good day.